I asked my daughter about her wedding preparations and she calmly responded, "Mom, I already got married. We only invited people who really matter." My husband chimed in, "Just send the money for the beach house and stop being so dramatic." I just smiled and left the conversation. 2 days later, I left a wedding gift at their door that made my husband scream nonstop. I had called Lily to check in on her wedding plans, eager to hear about the details. Flowers, dress, guest list, all the little things a mother loves to know. But what she said when she picked up the phone stopped me cold. "Mom, I already got married. We only invited people who really matter." The words echoed in my mind as I struggled to make sense of them. My daughter had gone ahead and married without a word, without telling me. A pit formed in my stomach, and I felt the silence between us grow wider with each passing second. How could she have done this? How could she have kept something so monumental from me? I had always been the one she turned to for everything. The little things, the big things, the milestones in life. We had shared everything, or so I thought. My heart clenched as the reality of her words sank in, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If you believe in the power of family and resilience, hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps spread this story of strength. The phone felt heavy in my hand, as though the weight of her silence was pressing down on me. I wanted to speak, to ask her why, to demand an explanation. But the words caught in my throat. How could I even begin to ask for something that felt like it had already been stolen from me? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What do you mean, Lily? You've already gotten married." My voice cracked slightly, betraying the confusion and hurt I felt. "Without me? Without telling me?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for me to wonder if she was second-guessing herself. But then her voice returned, calm and distant. "We just wanted something small, Mom. Just a few people. It was all about us, not about anyone else." Her words were final, like she was explaining something trivial, not the life-changing moment that should have been shared with those who loved her most. I didn't know what to say. The shock was still too fresh, too raw. All I could manage was a soft, "I don't understand, Lily." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I looked around the room, the house that had been our home for so long. George, still asleep in the bedroom, oblivious to the conversation that was unraveling my world. The quiet that usually felt so comforting now seemed alien. I hadn't realized how fragile everything was until it was slipping through my fingers. I thought about how our family had always been tight-knit, how we had cherished our traditions. Lily's wedding was supposed to be the pinnacle of those traditions, a moment we'd all share together. But instead I was left on the outside, watching from a distance as she made this huge decision without me. "Why didn't you tell me, Lily?" I finally managed to ask, my voice softer this time, tinged with hurt. She sighed, and I could hear the faint rustling of something in the background, probably Tyler, her new husband. "We just wanted it to be private, Mom. It was our day. We didn't want to make it into something it wasn't." Private. The word stung. This wasn't about privacy. It was about exclusion. It was about a distance that had grown between us, a distance I hadn't even seen coming. Before I could say anything else, George's voice cut through the line, even though he wasn't physically there. "Just send the money for the beach house and stop being so dramatic," he had said, the words slicing through the tension like a knife. It wasn't anger that filled me, but something worse, an overwhelming sense of coldness. George, the man who had been by my side through thick and thin, now speaking about our family's most cherished asset like it was just another transaction. I blinked, staring at the phone in my hand, wondering if I had heard him wrong. "You don't even care, do you?" I asked, a bitterness creeping into my voice. Lily's response was quick, too quick. "Mom, it's not like that." But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. The words felt rehearsed, and the distance between us felt too real. Tyler had woven his way into her life like a thread she couldn't escape, and now he was pulling the strings, deciding who mattered enough to be a part of this moment, and I wasn't one of them. The phone call ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving me in the silence of our home, stunned and confused. I sat in my recliner, the warmth from my coffee long gone, the feeling of security I had taken for granted slipping away. I replayed her words in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Lily had chosen to exclude me, to hide the biggest moment of her life from me. She had chosen Tyler, the man who had come into our lives with charm and promises, but who had slowly, almost imperceptibly, pushed me aside. For a long time I sat there, the quiet of the house pressing in on me. The morning that had started with so much promise now felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. The storm I hadn't seen coming was here and I was caught in its wake. I stood up, pacing around the room trying to make sense of it all. Had I been so blind to the changes in Lily? When had things started to shift? How had Tyler managed to insert himself so fully into her life that she could make such a huge decision without even telling me? I thought back to all the moments I had missed, the dinners she had skipped, the excuses she made, the days when she seemed to pull away just a little at a time. I had dismissed them as nothing more than the growing pains of adulthood. He was busy, I told myself. He was just figuring things out. But now, as I looked back, I realized those were the first cracks in the foundation of our relationship. I thought about George, who had always been the rock of our family, but now he seemed distant too. The way he had spoken about the beach house so callously, it wasn't just the property he was dismissing. It was everything we had built together, the memories of our family, the moments we had shared. He didn't seem to care anymore. I sank back into my recliner, my mind swirling with questions I couldn't answer. I had been so focused on keeping everything in place, making sure our family traditions were upheld, that I hadn't seen the changes happening right under my nose. The peaceful mornings, the calm routines, the dinners we used to have, all of it had been an illusion. Things had been falling apart slowly and I hadn't noticed until it was too late. In the days that followed, the silence between Lily and me grew deeper. I tried to reach out, but the messages I sent were met with short, unfeeling replies. The distance that had started as a small gap now felt like an insurmountable chasm. And as much as I wanted to bridge it, I didn't know how. She had made her choice and I was left to wonder if there was anything I could do to bring her back. The beach house, the one that had always been the heart of our family's memories, became a symbol of everything I had lost. And I realized then that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about the unraveling of everything I had known and believed in. I had always thought I knew my daughter. But the woman she had become was someone I didn't recognize anymore. The illusion of peace, of stability, had shattered, and in its place was something much darker and more complicated. The phone rang just as I was beginning to settle into the quiet of the house. I had just finished my coffee and for a fleeting moment, I felt the weight of my thoughts lighten. It was early, too early for much of the world to be awake, but I could hear Lily's name flash across the screen. I picked it up eagerly, expecting to hear her cheerful voice, excitedly rattling off plans for the wedding. The wedding that had been looming over our conversations for months. I wanted to hear about the dress she had picked, the flowers she wanted, the plans that were so carefully mapped out for the day she'd been anticipating for so long. But when Lily answered, her tone was flat. There was no excitement, no giddiness, just a distant, almost detached voice that I couldn't quite place. "Mom, I already got married," she said. The words hung in the air, suspended between us, almost too much to grasp. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What?" I managed, barely hearing my own voice. "What do you mean, already got married?" My mind was scrambling to catch up with her words, my heart racing as if it had missed a beat. "We only invited people who really matter." The words reverberated in my ears, and I could hear the coldness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Lily had married without telling me, without even considering that I, her mother, would be there. The flood of emotions hit me all at once. Confusion, hurt, anger, and above all, disbelief. I couldn't understand what she was saying. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I misheard her. Maybe she was joking. But when the silence stretched out, it was clear this was no joke. Lily, my daughter, the girl I had raised, had gone ahead and married someone without a word to me. Without an invitation. Without a seat at her wedding table. I felt a sting in my chest, sharp and unyielding as the truth started to sink in. The shock felt like an overwhelming wave that threatened to knock me over. The silence between us grew, thick and heavy. I had no idea what to say. The words didn't seem to come out right. And then, as though to add a fresh layer to my pain, I heard George's voice in the background. "Just send the money for the beach house and stop being so dramatic," he said, his voice low and detached, cutting through the tension like a blade. I felt the sting of his words before I even had time to process them. It wasn't just the fact that he was speaking so coldly. It was the way he said it, as if our family's prized possession, the beach house, had become nothing more than an afterthought. His indifference to the moment I was experiencing felt like a slap in the face. Here I was, reeling from the shock of being excluded from my own daughter's wedding, and George had already turned his attention to the beach house. Lily remained silent, and I could hear the faintest sound of Tyler, her new husband, in the background. Was she even listening to me? Did she hear the hurt in my voice? It was as though everything I had known, everything I had worked for in raising her, was slipping away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell George to stop. Stop with the cold detachment, stop with the focus on the beach house. I wanted to demand an explanation from both of them. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, staring blankly at the phone in my hand, listening to the quiet silence between us. There was no apology, no understanding. Just words that fell heavy and cold, leaving me alone in the storm of my own feelings. When I finally found my voice, I asked, "How could you do this? How could you marry without telling me? Without even inviting me?" But my words were weak, lost in the silence that enveloped me. I could hear Lily's voice again, but it was different this time. She was quieter, almost resigned. "It wasn't personal, Mom," she said, but it felt hollow. It felt rehearsed. It was just what we wanted. We thought it would be better this way. There was again the distance. The barrier between us, which had always been so small, now felt like a chasm. The intimacy of mother and daughter was gone, replaced by an unspoken tension I couldn't bridge. I sat down, still holding the phone, but now it felt like a foreign object in my hand. There had been a time when Lily would have come to me with everything. The big decisions, the small ones, all the moments in between. But now this was a cruel reminder of how far apart we had drifted, of how little she needed me anymore. The realization was enough to knock the wind out of me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I thought of George, who, up until this moment, had been my rock, my constant. But now, hearing him speak so dismissively, I could feel a cold distance growing between us too. When did things change? When did this cold, businesslike approach to our family's most treasured memories become the norm? Was this how we had become? So detached, so removed from the emotions that had once made our family strong? The beach house, the one we had shared for years, the one where Lily had spent summers as a child, where we had all made memories together, had always been the symbol of our family's unity. And yet here George was treating it as just another asset. Something to be negotiated. Something to be dealt with. The pride I had once felt for our family's legacy was now tainted by the indifference in George's voice. I felt like I was unraveling. Like everything I had held dear was slipping through my fingers, one conversation at a time. I had spent years building this family, creating a foundation of love and tradition. And now I was watching it all fade away. Slowly, quietly, without any warning. But more than the shock, more than the hurt from being excluded, there was something worse that was beginning to settle in. It was the realization that Lily had changed. It wasn't just the wedding or the exclusion. It was the growing distance between us that I had failed to see until now. She had become someone else, someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't reach. And I was left grappling with the painful truth that it might be too late to fix things. I thought about the small things I had ignored. Her increasingly short replies, her reluctance to come home for family dinners, her sudden preoccupation with Tyler. It all pointed to the same thing. She had been drawn away. Fully. Imperceptibly. But now, in this moment, the truth was undeniable. She had chosen him. And I was left to wonder where I stood in her life, if I still had a place at all. I started to wonder if I had missed the signs. Had I failed her as a mother? Had I let Tyler manipulate her without even noticing? Or was I simply blind to the changes happening right under my nose? The questions swirled in my mind as I sat there, lost in the quiet. I had been so caught up in my own pain, my own confusion, that I hadn't stopped to ask if there was more I could have done to stop this from happening. Had I truly failed my daughter, or had I simply been unaware of the person she was becoming? I didn't know the answer, but the weight of uncertainty pressed on me, suffocating me in ways I couldn't explain. I remember the first time I met Tyler. How he walked into our home with that confident, smooth demeanor that seemed to belong to someone who knew exactly what he wanted. His handshake was firm, almost too firm, like he had been taught that a strong grip was a symbol of power. He was impeccably dressed, his clothes clearly custom-made, and his smile was wide, almost rehearsed, like it had been practiced in front of a mirror for hours. He had all the makings of someone who had been polished to perfection, a man who knew how to play the game and win it. At first I thought he was the ideal match for Lily. He was charming, well-spoken, and had that confidence that people often mistake for success. Lily had always been drawn to ambition, and here was a man who seemed to have it in spades. He talked about his career with passion, about the investments he'd made, and how he was already thinking about their future together. To be honest, I felt a bit relieved. Lily had struggled with relationships in the past, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone worthy of her love. But soon I started to notice things that didn't sit quite right. The way Tyler's eyes would light up when he talked about property, his investments, and the kinds of financial opportunities that seemed to always come back to real estate. I remember one particular dinner, a night where we sat around the table, laughing and enjoying the warmth of each other's company. But as the conversation turned to future plans, Tyler somehow steered it toward investments. Specifically, he brought up the beach house. The way he said it, so casually, so naturally, made me feel uncomfortable. It was as though he had already laid claim to it in his mind. Lily seemed to hang on every word he said. Her eyes sparkled as he talked about the potential of family-owned properties, about how valuable they could become with the right kind of investment. I watched her closely, and in that moment it hit me. She was more interested in what Tyler had to say than in anything I had ever told her about the place that had been in our family for generations. The beach house, the place where I had taken her as a little girl, the place that held so many memories, was no longer just a sentimental piece of our family's history. To Tyler, it was an asset, a stepping stone toward something bigger. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Tyler wasn't just interested in Lily, he was interested in everything she could bring with her. The more I watched him, the more I saw how subtly he manipulated conversations, always guiding them toward topics where he could insert his knowledge of money, investments, and power. He wasn't just talking about their future. He was shaping it in a way that suited his interests. His charm was undeniable, yes, but underneath it there was something calculating, something cold. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Tyler had positioned himself as the provider, the one who knew how to secure their financial future. Every word he spoke about money seemed laced with authority, like he was an expert in the field. I had always been the one Lily came to when she needed advice, but with Tyler now in the picture, I could see her turning to him instead. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. In the small moments when she would ask Tyler for his opinion on investments instead of coming to me. In the way she would mention how he had helped her understand the intricacies of real estate, how he had explained the importance of securing assets early in life. I remember the last family dinner where we all gathered around the table before everything started to change. Lily had been quiet that night, distant, almost as if she wasn't really there with us. Tyler was the one who kept the conversation flowing, steering it in directions that felt increasingly uncomfortable to me. He had a way of making everything about him, about his plans, about his vision for the future. And with each passing conversation, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own family. There were moments when Tyler would distract Lily with his ideas about their future, his grand plans for financial security and investment opportunities. I could see how easily she was swept away by it all. And it wasn't just the big conversations, it was the little things too. The small, seemingly innocent comments he made about how family events, like our Sunday dinners, were a bit too distracting for them as a couple. He would smile, of course, and say it in a way that made it sound like a joke, but I could tell that his words were meant to distance Lily from us. Slowly she stopped coming around as much, stopped calling as often, and I found myself wondering why. At first I brushed it off. Lily was just busy, I told myself. She was starting her own life, and that was natural. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her becoming an adult. This was something different. Tyler was pulling her away bit by bit, like a tug on a string that was slowly unraveling the bond we had once shared. He was creating a new world for her, one where I had no place, one where only he and his vision of the future mattered. And then, there were the moments when Tyler would pull Lily aside to talk about their plans, their financial goals. I could see it in her face, the way she looked at him with such trust, such admiration. It was the kind of look that I once saw when she was a little girl looking up to me for answers. Now she looked to him for everything, advice, guidance, and even approval. George began to notice the same unease, though he was quieter about it. I had always thought of him as the protective father, the one who would stand guard against anything that might hurt our family. But his growing concern about Tyler seemed different than mine. George would occasionally mention that something didn't sit right with him, but I brushed it off. It was just George being a father. I had always thought he was overreacting, that he was just being protective of Lily. He had always been wary of anyone who came into her life, and Tyler was no exception. But now, as I look back, I wonder if George had seen things more clearly than I did. Tyler had already been manipulating Lily, planting ideas in her head about how she needed to focus on their life together, how she needed to prioritize their future. And with each passing day, Lily seemed more distant, more isolated. I had been so blinded by the love and charm Tyler exuded that I failed to see what was really happening. It wasn't just that Lily was pulling away from us. It was that Tyler was systematically isolating her from the very people who had always been there for her. And as I thought about it more, I realized that I had let it happen. I had let him take her away piece by piece until she was no longer the daughter I had raised, the one who would share her life with me. Now, as the distance between us grew, I could no longer deny it. Tyler had slowly, subtly stolen Lily away from me, and I had allowed it to happen. After Lily's call, everything shifted. The shock of her words still lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. I could feel the heaviness of that moment pressing on me, as though the very fabric of my life had been torn in two. George sat quietly, his mind working in that way I had grown so used to over the years, calculating, assessing. I wanted to scream, to shout at the unfairness of it all, but instead I sat beside him waiting for his next words. He finally broke the silence. "We need to handle this carefully," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something darker. "That man Tyler, he's no ordinary guy. He's not just after Lily. He wants something from us. Something that's been in our family for years." I looked at him, still struggling to process the weight of his words. George was always the one who saw things clearly, and I could hear the resolute edge in his voice that told me he was already plotting the next step. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. George looked at me, his eyes narrowing with determination. "The beach house," he said as though it were obvious. "That's what he wants. He's been playing this game for months. We can't let him take it." I swallowed hard, feeling a pit open up in my stomach. The beach house. It had always been the heart of our family, the place where we shared holidays, laughter, and memories. To think that someone, Tyler, might be using it as a pawn in a twisted game left me feeling sick to my core. But George was right. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. This was about something much bigger. We spent the next few days in a kind of frantic, silent partnership. George dove into the investigation, contacting old acquaintances from the real estate world. People he had worked with over the years, people who knew the ins and outs of the industry. It was clear that Tyler wasn't just some well-off businessman. His interest in Lily went beyond love, beyond the promises of a shared life. It was a well-thought-out scheme, carefully woven into the fabric of our family, something we hadn't seen until now. I watched as George connected with a private investigator, someone he had trusted years ago, back when we had dealt with a similar situation involving a shady contractor. The investigator, Doug, was someone who had a knack for digging up dirt, and he wasn't the type to back down when things got messy. George had a plan, and it was unfolding in front of me like a tightly coiled spring. Late one evening, George came to me with a folder in his hands, his expression grim. "Look at this," he said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. I opened the folder slowly, not sure what I was about to find. But when I did, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. There it was, the undeniable evidence. Tyler's history with other women whose families owned significant properties. Women like Claire and Zoe, both of whom had been targeted and manipulated by Tyler in exactly the same way he had manipulated Lily. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My mind raced through everything I had seen in Tyler's behavior. The way he had steered conversations toward finances, the way he had gotten closer to Lily as she grew more distant from us. It all made sense now in the worst possible way. He had done this before, broken apart families, taken what he wanted, and left nothing but destruction in his wake. George flipped through the pages, showing me court documents, police reports, and witness statements from Claire and Zoe. Both had been engaged to Tyler at one point, both had been manipulated into transferring assets, and both had eventually discovered the truth about his true intentions. The pattern was clear, and it left me stunned. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? It was a calculated move on Tyler's part. He wasn't just after a loving relationship with Lily. No, he was methodically working his way through her life, her family, and everything we held dear. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. He was no different than a predator circling his prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. and I had failed to see it. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I had always prided myself on being the protector of our family, the one who kept us united. But now I wondered if I had failed Lily, if I had missed the signs that Tyler was not who he appeared to be. And what about George? Why had we not seen through him sooner? But George wasn't focused on guilt. He was focused on what came next. "We need to take action," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "We can't let this go on. It's time to show Tyler exactly who he's messing with." I nodded, my mind racing. George had a plan, and now we were ready to put it into motion. We couldn't just sit back and wait for things to unravel further. We had to confront Tyler, to expose him for what he was before he could take anything else from us. The plan was simple, but its execution would be anything but. George decided that the only way to truly make Tyler see the consequences of his actions was to give him a gift. A wedding gift, to be exact. A gift that would expose the truth behind Tyler's manipulations and force him to confront the damage he had done. George spent the next few days assembling everything. Documents, evidence, testimonies, everything we had gathered about Tyler's past. The folder was thick, filled with the weight of the truth. And that's when I saw it. The note George had written, a simple statement of fact. A stark reminder that Tyler could no longer hide behind his charm and his carefully crafted persona. "Congratulations on your marriage," the note read. "Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. Consider this my wedding gift to you both. The gift of truth." It was perfect. It was everything we had been working toward. The ultimate way to expose Tyler for who he really was, to take back control of what he had tried to steal from us. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that Tyler was about to face the truth, the harsh reality of his actions. The night we delivered the portfolio to Lily and Tyler's door, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The evidence was undeniable. There would be no denying the truth now. As George placed the portfolio at their doorstep, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. The game was over. The truth would be out, and Tyler would have to answer for his actions. As we walked away from the doorstep, I felt a strange calm settle over me. We had done everything we could. The rest was up to Lily and Tyler. But I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Whatever happened next, I would be ready to face it. Tyler's reign of manipulation was over. The gift of truth had been delivered. The morning after George had left the package at Lily and Tyler's doorstep, the house felt unnervingly quiet. There was nothing to do now but wait. We had done all we could, and now it was in Lily's hands. George was unusually calm, as if he had known from the beginning that this moment would come. I, on the other hand, was filled with anticipation and dread in equal measure. It wasn't that I thought Lily wouldn't see the truth. She was smart, thoughtful, but I feared how she would react. Would she accept it? Or would she continue to defend him even after everything that had been laid out? The phone rang late that afternoon. It was Lily. Her voice came through the receiver, low and shaky, something I'd never heard before. There was no cheerfulness, no bravado in her tone, only a quiet, raw vulnerability. I could hear her struggling to keep her composure. She wasn't the confident, determined woman I had once known. She sounded like a girl caught in the throes of something she couldn't escape. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking slightly, I don't know what to say." I could hear her deep breaths, trying to steady herself, but it was clear that everything was unraveling for her. My chest tightened as I listened, waiting for the words I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. I saw the documents," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. I never realized what he was doing. How could I have been so blind?" There was a long pause. For a moment I didn't know if she would continue. The silence between us stretched longer than I ever expected, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence you share with someone who is finally coming to terms with the truth. A silence that carries both heartbreak and healing. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said finally. "I've been so foolish." I couldn't hold it back anymore. My heart broke for her, for the realization that she had been manipulated and deceived. But as I spoke to her, there was a sense of relief that washed over me. She was waking up. Lily had never been one to back down from a hard truth, and hearing her admit the reality of Tyler's manipulation was like a dam breaking, letting the light back in. That evening Tyler was arrested. I had expected it to feel like a victory, but when the news broke, it felt oddly anticlimactic. The police had come for him at his apartment, where he had likely been planning his next move, unaware that his world was about to collapse. When I first heard the news, there was a strange sense of satisfaction, yes. But it wasn't the elation I had imagined. Instead, it was a quiet relief that washed over me. Tyler, the man who had so carefully woven his web of lies, had finally been caught. He couldn't hurt anyone else, couldn't manipulate anyone else the way he had with Lily. That alone was enough to make me feel like justice had been served, but I couldn't help but think about what had been lost in the process. The time, the trust, the pain Lily had endured. The phone call from Lily that night was different. There was no defensiveness in her voice now. It was raw, open, and full of the kind of vulnerability I had only seen in her as a child, when she would curl up against me after a bad dream. She called George, and I could hear him talking quietly on the other end of the line, his voice a steady anchor in the midst of the storm she was facing. "I never thought it would end like this," she admitted to George. "I didn't see it. Thought I knew him. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now I see it. He wasn't just after me. He wanted everything. He wanted what we had." I could hear the pain in her voice, the sting of betrayal. And yet there was something more, something almost freeing in the way she spoke now. The tension that had once been between us, the walls she had built in her relationship with George and me, was slowly starting to dissolve. For the first time in months, I heard Lily the way she used to be, strong, grounded, and aware. "I'm so sorry for everything, for not seeing what he was doing. I can't believe I let myself be fooled like that," she continued, her voice heavy with regret. I felt a pang of sorrow for her, but also an overwhelming sense of pride. Lily was facing the truth, and even though it hurt, she was learning from it. She wasn't blaming anyone else. She wasn't pretending that she hadn't made mistakes. She was taking responsibility for her actions, her choices, and most importantly, for the first time in a long while, she was letting us in. Tyler's arrest was just the beginning of what would be a long, difficult journey of healing. As Lily came to terms with everything that had happened, there were moments of deep sadness. She had been so deeply invested in the man she thought Tyler was, in the future she thought they would have together. And now, that future was a shattered version of what she had imagined. But there was a turning point, something I had been waiting for. A moment when Lily stood tall again, when the realization finally hit her that she was stronger than Tyler's lies. She wasn't the naive woman who had fallen for his manipulation. She was someone who had learned a painful lesson, but one that would ultimately make her wiser and stronger. Watching her come to terms with her choices wasn't easy. There was a mixture of relief and sadness in me as I stood by, supporting her through this painful awakening. Part of me wished I had been able to shield her from all of this, that I had been able to protect her from the heartache. But I knew that sometimes, people had to fall before they could rise again. And Lily, my sweet, strong girl, was rising. As we sat down together, just the two of us, George's steady presence behind us, I could feel a shift. We had been through so much together, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw Lily open up. She was ready to heal, and I was ready to help her. It wasn't going to be easy. But with time, I believed we would find our way back to each other. The healing process would take time, but I felt hopeful. Lily had already made the hardest step by opening her eyes to the truth. And now we could start rebuilding our relationship piece by piece. George and I had fought to protect her, and in the end we had succeeded. But more importantly, Lily had found the strength to protect herself from someone who had taken advantage of her trust. There was still work to be done, still a long road ahead, but in that moment, I realized that we had come through it stronger, more connected, and more united than we had ever been before. The truth had been painful, but it had set us free. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Tyler's downfall came swiftly, almost too swiftly for me to fully absorb the gravity of it. The trial felt like something out of a distant nightmare, a blur of faces, papers, and cold, unforgiving legal jargon. But amid the chaos, one thing was abundantly clear. Tyler was no longer in control. The man who had once charmed us, who had seemed so perfect in every way, now stood exposed, his facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence that George and I had carefully collected. It felt surreal, almost like watching a character unravel on a television screen, yet this was real. This was my family. The moment Claire and Zoe stepped onto the stand to testify, I felt the tide of justice shift irrevocably. Their words were precise, painful, and powerful. It was one thing to see the evidence in front of me, but hearing Claire describe the manipulation she had suffered at Tyler's hands, How he had isolated her from her family, how he had worn her down until she was ready to give him everything, brought a kind of clarity. Zoe's testimony was even more damning. The way she spoke about the contracts Tyler had convinced her to sign, how he had expertly disguised his true intentions, was chilling. These women had lived through the same nightmare that Lily was now waking up from. And then there was Tyler. He sat there in his tailored suit, looking completely out of place in the courtroom, like a man who still believed he could talk his way out of anything. But his smooth charm was useless now. The evidence, the testimony, and the sheer weight of his lies bore down on him, and the walls finally came crashing down. As I watched him squirm, I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. This was the man who had infiltrated our family, who had manipulated my daughter, and now he was being exposed for what he truly was. His downfall was not just a victory for me, but for every person who had ever been preyed upon by someone like him. Tyler was no longer untouchable. The legal consequences of Tyler's actions were swift and severe. The sentence came down hard. Prison time, restitution, and a long list of other penalties that would ensure Tyler would never be able to manipulate anyone again. I remember sitting in the courtroom, the final verdict echoing in my ears. There was no joy in it, no elation. Only a sense of vindication, a sense that the scales had been balanced. For all the pain he had caused, for all the damage he had inflicted on Lily and our family, justice had finally been served. When the judge pronounced his sentence, I glanced over at George, who was sitting beside me, his hand resting gently on mine. I could feel the tension in his fingers, the years of worry finally unwinding. It was over. Tyler would pay for what he had done, and I could finally breathe again. There was no satisfaction in seeing him handcuffed and led away. I didn't feel any triumph in watching him leave the courtroom in disgrace. All I could think about was Lily, the daughter who had been caught up in this mess, the daughter who had suffered because of him. In the aftermath of the trial, things began to settle into a new, unfamiliar routine. Lily was no longer the same person she had been when all this started. She was quieter now, more reflective, but there was something else, something I hadn't seen in her for a long time, a strength that I hadn't known was there. It was like watching someone wake from a long, deep sleep, and as she started to heal, so did I. The healing wasn't immediate and it wasn't easy. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if things would ever be the same between us. But then there were the small moments, those quiet dinners where the conversation flowed without the tension that had once existed between us. Lily would talk about her day and we would laugh together like we used to. She began asking questions again, seeking advice, and slowly the gap that Tyler had created between us began to close. It wasn't overnight, but it was progress, and that's all I could ask for. As I watched Lily begin to heal, I couldn't help but reflect on my own role in all of this. Had I failed to protect her when she needed me the most? Had I been too wrapped up in my own world to see the signs of Tyler's manipulation? There were moments I wished I had been more present, more aware of what was happening beneath the surface. I had been so focused on keeping everything together, on maintaining the image of a perfect family, that I had missed the subtle shifts in Lily's life. I had assumed she was happy, that everything was fine, but I had overlooked the red flags. But now, as I watched her rebuild herself, I realized something important. I hadn't failed her. I had loved her with everything I had. As a mother, I had done my best. No one can protect their child from every mistake, every heartache. Sometimes they have to learn for themselves. I couldn't shield her from the consequences of Tyler's actions, but I could be here for her, supporting her as she navigated the aftermath. George and I too had changed. We had always been a team, but this experience had brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. There were moments during the trial when I could see the strain on his face, the weight of the burden he had carried for so long. But through it all, George had been the rock of our family. His resolve, his quiet strength, and his unwavering love for Lily were more evident now than ever before. I found myself appreciating him in a way I hadn't before, seeing him not just as my husband but as a partner, someone who would do anything to protect our family. Through the pain and the chaos, George and I had fought to protect Lily, and in the end we had succeeded. I knew we still had work to do, that the scars of what had happened would take time to heal, but I was no longer afraid of the future. Together we had weathered the storm and we were stronger for it. Lily had learned a painful lesson, but she was no longer the same vulnerable woman who had fallen prey to Tyler. She was someone I could be proud of. The journey of healing would take time, but I knew we would make it. The love we had for each other, the bond that held us together, was stronger than any manipulation Tyler could have ever woven into our lives. As long as we had each other, we would always find our way back. Tyler's influence was gone, and with it the darkness that had clouded our family's future. It was time to move forward, and with George by my side I knew we would rebuild together. The beach house was never just a building to us. It was so much more than a structure made of wood, nails, and paint. It was the embodiment of our family's legacy, a place where generations of memories had been made. When I think about the beach house, I see more than just the walls and the ocean view. I see the summer spent with George and Lily, the laughter echoing through the rooms, the scent of salt water in the air, and the warmth of the sun casting golden light on the wooden deck. It was where our family had found peace, laughter, and a sense of belonging. The beach house had been George's father's dream, his gift to the family. He had built it with his own 2 hands, every nail driven with love, every plank of wood carefully chosen. It was the place where George had spent his childhood, learning to fish, to swim, and to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. It was the place where Lily had learned to ride a bike, her small legs trembling with excitement as she raced up and down the sand. The beach house was a constant in our lives, a symbol of all that we held dear. But when Tyler entered our lives, that symbol of family was threatened. It wasn't just a property to him, it was a target. Tyler had seen the beach house not as a home but as a stepping stone. His manipulation wasn't just about Lily, it was about gaining control over this precious family treasure. He saw an opportunity to turn our memories into something transactional, something he could own and use for his own gain. The thought of losing the beach house, of losing that piece of our family's soul, was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just the loss of a property. It was the potential loss of everything George's father had worked for, everything that had defined our family's bond. When we realized Tyler had been using Lily to position himself closer to the beach house, I couldn't help but feel betrayed, not just by him, but by the fact that he had stolen something so personal from us. It was more than just the physical space that was at risk. It was our connection to the past, to everything that had made us who we were. Losing the beach house meant losing the memories we had created there, the ones that had anchored us to each other, the ones that had been passed down through generations. For George, the idea of the house being taken from us was a loss so deep it felt like the very foundation of our family was crumbling. But then came the moment when we realized that we weren't going to let it go without a fight. Lily and I began to talk about what we could do to reclaim that piece of ourselves, to restore what had been threatened by Tyler's greed. The idea was born quietly, almost like a whisper in the wind, but it grew with each conversation, each moment where Lily and I began to reconnect. We would restore the beach house, not just physically but emotionally. The project would become a way for us to heal, to reclaim what had been so nearly taken from us. It would be a shared effort, one where we could create new memories, new moments that would belong to us, not to Tyler and his schemes. We spent weekends together planning the restoration. The process of bringing the beach house back to life mirrored the healing of our relationship. We painted the walls, refinished the floors, and added touches that had always been missing. Each brushstroke, each plank of wood we laid down, felt like a step toward restoring not just the house, but the trust that had been fractured between Lily and me. I watched as she transformed before my eyes, no longer the girl who had been manipulated, but a woman who was ready to take ownership of her past and her future. George joined us when he could, offering his steady hand and his quiet support. The 3 of us working together rebuilding the beach house was our way of affirming the strength of our family. The beach house became more than just a physical space. It became a symbol of new beginnings. It was no longer just a reminder of everything we had lost. It was now a place where we would build our future. With each room we restored, with each corner of the house we brought back to life, we were reaffirming our commitment to each other. Lily and I had been through so much and there were still scars, but the act of creating something together was a healing balm. The house stood as a testament to our resilience, to our ability to come together, even after everything had fallen apart. The process was not easy, and there were moments when it felt like the weight of everything we had endured would crush us. But we persisted. We had to. Tyler's shadow still loomed large, but as we worked, as we laughed and cried and shared our stories, it felt like we were slowly pushing that shadow aside. The beach house was becoming ours again, and so was our family. The air in the house began to change, from the stale memories of betrayal to a fresh, renewed sense of hope. I remember one afternoon as the sun was beginning to set, We stood on the deck together, watching the sky change colors. Lily had just finished putting a new coat of paint on the old porch swing, and we were sitting there talking about nothing in particular. It felt like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. We had come so far, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the possibility of a future where we would be whole again. George joined us then, his presence a quiet reassurance. We all sat there together, our hearts a little lighter, the future ahead of us, full of possibilities. The beach house wasn't just a symbol of the past anymore. It was a symbol of our strength, of the way we had fought for each other and for the life we knew we deserved. We had reclaimed what was rightfully ours, our home, our family, and our dignity. Tyler's influence was gone, and with it the toxic presence that had nearly torn us apart. It was over, and in its place was something beautiful, something real. As I looked at the house, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. This was our home now, a place where the wounds of the past could begin to heal, a place where Lily, George, and I could rebuild. And though the journey had been painful and though it had cost us dearly, I knew one thing for sure: we were stronger for it. The beach house, once threatened, was now a symbol of our unity, our love, and our unbreakable bond. Looking forward, I couldn't help but feel hopeful. We had faced down the storm together and we had come out the other side. Our family had been tested, but it had also been forged in fire. The beach house, as it stood now, was a living testament to our strength. And I knew that, moving forward, it would remain a beacon of hope, of love, and of the unshakable foundation we had built together. The last time I saw Tyler, his arrogance had been unmistakable. He had that same charming smile, the one that made him so dangerous, the one that hid the predator underneath. I remember the way he looked at me and George, as though we were nothing more than obstacles in his path, small bumps on the road to his conquest. But that was before the truth came crashing down. Before he realized he had been outsmarted, not by a shrewd lawyer or a clever investigator, but by a mother's love, a father's protection, and a daughter's awakening. We had gathered the evidence. We had pieced together the lies, the manipulation, and the web of deceit that Tyler had woven. He had thought he was untouchable, that no one would see through the mask he had worn so carefully for years. But when the day finally came, when the full extent of his actions was laid bare before him, his face dropped. I'll never forget the moment he realized the game was over. He had always believed he was the one holding the cards, but now it was clear that his hand had been exposed and he was losing. There was no pride in this victory. There was no sense of triumph or gloating. George and I weren't looking for revenge. We weren't looking to watch him squirm for our own satisfaction. It wasn't about humiliating him or making him suffer. It was about something far more important: Lily regaining control of her life. For so long she had been under Tyler's thumb, unable to see the truth. Now, with Tyler exposed, Lily could start the long process of healing, reclaiming her independence and learning to trust herself again. As Tyler was taken away, I felt a sense of justice settle into my bones. It wasn't the kind of justice that came with a dramatic moment or a victorious cheer. It wasn't the kind of justice that made you feel like you had won. It was a quiet satisfaction, a reassurance that Lily would no longer be vulnerable to his manipulation. That, to me, was justice. Lily was free. And in that moment, that was enough. What mattered most, what felt like the true reward, was not just seeing Tyler carted off to face the consequences of his actions, but seeing Lily stand up for herself. Seeing her own transformation was a gift far greater than any retribution. For the first time in months, Lily seemed like herself again. She called us, her voice shaking with emotion, but there was something different in it. A new strength, a new resolve. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry, Dad," she said through her tears, and I could hear the weight of those words. She had been manipulated, yes, but now she was starting to understand just how deep that manipulation went. She wasn't the naive girl she had been before. She had learned hard lessons, painful lessons, but they had made her stronger. The charm that Tyler had used to hide his true intentions no longer worked on her. She could see through it now. She could see the truth, and that was the greatest gift she could ever receive. What happened next was the real healing. We slowly began to rebuild the bridge between us. George and I were patient, but we also needed time to heal ourselves. We had all been through so much. Lily had to come to terms with what had happened, with the fact that she had allowed herself to be manipulated. But the guilt that had once clouded her thoughts began to lift as she saw that we weren't blaming her. We understood. We had all been deceived in different ways. The healing process was messy, complicated, but it was necessary. I think the first moment we truly began to heal together was when Lily invited us to dinner, just the three of us in our newly restored beach house. It had become more than just a home. It had become a symbol of our strength. We had fought for it, fought for our family, and now we were reclaiming it. As we sat at the dinner table, I could see how far we had come. There were still scars, still lingering doubts, but there was also love, understanding, and the kind of connection that comes when people fight for each other and come out stronger on the other side. The words flowed more easily now. Conversations weren't strained. Laughter, though hesitant at first, started to fill the air again. George and I shared quiet glances, the kind of glance that spoke volumes, thankful that our daughter had come back to us, that we had fought to protect her, and that we had won. Our family was intact, and though it would take time to fully heal, we had taken the first step. Reflecting on all that had happened, I realized something crucial. The justice we had fought for was never about making Tyler suffer. It wasn't even about protecting our legacy, though that was important too. It was about giving Lily the space to rebuild her life on her terms. The truth had been her gift. The truth had set her free. We had helped her see through the lies, and in doing so we had helped her find herself again. That was the gift that kept on giving. The final wedding gift, the one we had offered Lily all along, was something Tyler could never provide. It was the gift of truth, of love, and of protection. We hadn't wrapped it in ribbons or adorned it with bows, but it was the most valuable gift we could give her. It wasn't a fleeting gift, one that would sit on a shelf and collect dust. It was a gift that would last a lifetime. A gift that would help her stand tall, help her trust herself, and help her recognize when someone was trying to manipulate her. In the years to come, I knew Lily would carry the lessons from this experience with her. She had learned that trust was something to be earned, not freely given. She had learned that love wasn't supposed to feel like manipulation, and that sometimes, you had to see through the facade to truly understand a person's intentions. These were lessons that could only be learned through experience, through pain. But they would stay with her forever, shaping the way she saw the world, the way she saw herself, and the way she chose to love. As George and I stood in the beach house that evening, watching Lily take the first steps toward rebuilding her life, we couldn't help but feel grateful. We had lost a lot during this ordeal, but we had also gained so much. Our family was whole again, and our legacy, the beach house, was still standing strong. It would always stand as a symbol of our resilience, our strength, and our ability to fight for each other. Looking at Lily, I saw not just the daughter I had raised, but a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. It was a new chapter for us all. And as we moved forward together, we knew that the love we had for each other would never waver. Tyler's manipulation had tried to break us, but it had only made us stronger. And in the end, that was the true gift. If this journey of love, betrayal, and redemption touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. My favorite moment was when Lily finally saw through Tyler's lies and found her strength. What part resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. For more stories of family, healing, and triumph, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story.